You're now listening to the Urban Heat, 98.1 FM, and this is your favorite around the way therapist, Coach Law. Don't forget to tune in to Conversation.
I hear the music, the undertone of the music, and that's about it.
Yeah, he can hear the undertone of the music, but he can't
I
hear
can hear you
anything.
now. I hear you now.
You hear me now?
I hear you now.
Okay. All
Okay.
right. You can hear me now.
I hear you now.
All right. Well, we're good. I don't know what happened. All
Well,
right.
stuff happens.
Hey, stuff happens, but everybody, we're moving like we're cooking like hot grease. All right. So welcome to Conversations with Coach LA. We take two. So I hope everybody heard your bio. Maybe they didn't even hear that. So I'm gonna start over, right?
Well, they probably did. Well, I guess you're right.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start over. So without further ado, let me welcome you our first guest, Dr. Malik Vandermeer. He is a community activist. He's an organizer and a teacher. He has served as the president of the Boston Black Political Task Force and also the Boston Pan African Forum. He has also served as the local advisor to the Black Lives Matter movement. Dr. Vandermeer has also been teaching for 27 years at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where he was my professor. And he is a senior lecturer in the Africana Studies Department. He is also a grad. He also was a major of Africana American Studies at Northeastern University. He received his master's in community economic development, and he's also a graduate of the Business School of New Hampshire College, and he received his PhD and master's in leadership and change. How do you pronounce that? Dr.
Antioch.
Antioch University. So without further ado, let's please welcome Dr. Tony Vandermeer to Conversations with Coach Law. Welcome. Our next guest is Derrel Slim Weathers. He's a community organizer with Voices of Liberation and Feed the Hood, which I think is an awesome initiative. The founder of Heal the Hood program and the president and CEO of Rapper Rolls. As a community member and organizer, he seeks and lives by the motto of define ourselves for ourselves by drawing on his own lived experience as a survivor of moral corruption, which we'll learn more about. And without further ado, can we please welcome Derrel Slim Weathers?
Thank you for having me, Coach Law. I appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have both of you here. And welcome to Conversation with Coach LA, where we talk about all things, anything pretty much that is important to the people here in our community. You guys know you're on the Urban Heat, probably because you didn't hear me early. I'm going to repeat it. We are impacting our communities and we are radio with a purpose. You can find us on the heat98.1fm.com. So without further ado, guys, tonight's conversation is all about what we've been having go on in our community around guns and the violence just over the last few weeks. It's just been it's been really hard to see. I think my friend alone has attended about 3 funerals within the last 2 weeks, and they were all due to some level of violence, gun violence. So usually I ask guests, what therapy means to them, but for tonight's show, we're going to pivot a little bit and jump right into um, this conversation about Boston activists have really said enough is enough on gun violence, and we're wondering what could be done. So I wanted to get your perspectives first and foremost on just where you are, what your personal experience has been, and to shed some light on just where your heart is tonight, because a lot of people are hurting out here, so they're looking for some solutions, and they just want to. I think we need to vent. We need to just express our feelings. So people in the chat, if you've lost somebody recently, please share their name. We want to say their name and recognize all of the individuals that have been impacted by gun violence as well. So which one of you would like to start?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to your show. This is definitely a personal issue for me. Just um, yesterday, morning, I got a call, um, and my daughter was completely distraught because um, right Friday in Tin City, some kid was just shot in the head, and her cousin that lives with her and her mother actually saw it. And this is the same child whose father was murdered over by Copley Square, where they do the marathon march. So I spent most of yesterday with my daughter and her mother, just, trying to go through, talking through that and hang out and, for a little bit. But I went by the area and I ran into another young man whose brother was murdered in the same area. And I was very disappointed with the city. They didn't have any grief counselors. I don't know what happened to the street workers. The property managers there at Tin City, you know, they didn't have the cameras on. They didn't have any lights. They're not. The tenants are complaining about what's going on. This is completely ridiculous. And of course, the first response is for people to call the police. But if that was the case, we wouldn't have any problems. And so it's not about more police. It's about us taking control of our neighborhoods. The problem is that people are scared, about doing that. But that's what's going to solve it. And that the city has to show some leadership and put money into programs that address the root cause of violence in our community. And so the leadership also needs courage to address that, because if you have bad conditions that people have to experience, then they're going to end up turning on one another. But this goes further than just the city. It goes back to the question of colonialism and the way that African people have been treated and the way people who are working people have been exploited. That we have to change that structure and change that system if we hope to change what's going on in our communities, because it's very sad and very painful.
Those are some really great points about resources and programming, grief counseling. And I think, that's definitely a good response. I think afterwards, I'm curious what you think, Derrel, as well. Would you add anything um, to what Dr. Vandermeer has shared?
I think Dr. Vitamin had a lot of points. Like, just be real and just add on just the resources. I mean, when I said define ourselves for ourselves, I think that's the biggest part. I mean, when he said community stepping up and taking back the community first, we at that base right before we even got to practice democracy. I feel like we need to get in our community and get some leadership on, but like we really more knowledgeable. Like it has to be an empathetic and more loving space. Like he said, there should have been some grief counseling for that family and all these families on, but it seems like people who try to monetize off the pain more often.
And as a clinician myself, I often, wonder. I know I'm full, and there's constantly more people calling for therapy services, and sometimes I feel overwhelmed, like I'm only one person, but the need is so great and the demand is so great, and you don't want to burn out all your therapists, right? So we have to take care of ourselves as well. And then it's just a constant, it's so many so quickly, within short periods of time, and then you have whole family systems that are impacted as well. So I think, I'm just curious, do we think that the issue of violence in general, gun violence, are we going to be able to eradicate it? I think that's one of the issues that I see the most. Is there a certain level that we've gotten complacent and just sort of accepted that there will always be some level of violence? What do you guys think
Well,
about that?
well, before I kind of go to that, I want to make a comment around the question of therapy, because we have to look at therapy not within a Western construct, not within a Eurocentric orientation, which in some ways is very commercialized. We have to look at it from indigenous practices, right? Like when we were still treated as non-persons, before the Emancipation Proclamations and the 13th Amendment, we didn't have access to none of that. And so, and we were grieving because of the conditions we were in, and we were grieving when they were harming people who were resisting the conditions that we were in. But the community found a way to come together. And so the real question is that how do we begin to embrace these indigenous practices, not to put aside, therapy in a sense, because I think therapists also have to be changed to cultural appropriate ways of dealing with grief and harm, and so forth, to move forward. In terms of the issue of guns, the question becomes how they're using guns and how is it that guns are saturated, in the hands of kids who they won't even give health care to, right? We have to ask that particular question because it's a question of political will. For example, I travel to Cuba frequently. They don't have this problem. They don't have this problem, right? Because they have a policy where they don't, that's not the deal. But when people arguing, Second Amendment rights, in ways that go beyond our rights, right? To as human beings to live, then it's problematic. But again, I repeat, is that it is the community, it is the power of the people that have to come together and say enough is enough. And it's not a question of more police. It's a question of us organizing door to door, block to block, as Mel King used to say, and putting pressure on the local officials, the state officials, the federal officials, because as long as it is our kids and our communities is being harmed, we have to make life uncomfortable for everybody.
Mhm. Well said, Derrel.
I was just saying, like, it's just more corruption. Like, like if we was to take all these unlicensed guns and reverse them, man, it would be like he said, it would be very uncomfortable for these folks. You get what I'm saying? But the thing is that more corruption is what they thrive on. It's just they want us to kill each other and they don't want us to be knowledgeable of ourselves. So it's just at the end of the day, like we have to build our community. We have to go door to door, block to block, like ground and bring it back to the essence, because at the end of the day, all this digital marketing ain't gonna put people in the spaces where we need. You know what I'm saying? That's not real liberation. I feel like we have to just we have to change this, and I feel like it's very possible. I don't feel like it's not possible. I feel like right now we just have to, everybody who's watching right now, you're a leader and you have to find that light within yourself and you have to really believe in that, and not European media either.
So it sounds like what you both are saying is that it needs to be a collective effort of leadership. We need to go back to, some indigenous and practices. And how do we deal with what's going on right now is that sense of hopelessness. And, as Dr. Vanderbeer mentioned, you got young people with no health insurance. We have all of the haves and have nots regarding economic access that really is fueling some of these issues. But is there anything else behind it? Why are we choosing to kill each other? Why is it that we can't just have disagreements, or as we used to call it back in the day, duke it out with your fists? Why are we resulting to actually taking each other's life? What do you got?
Well,
What do you
well,
think about that?
let's think about this. If the government can say it's okay for them to go into another country and kill people, then how are they going to tell other people not to kill? I mean, the government sanctioned murder and death. And so that's what's in the media. That's what's on TV. That's the culture that we live in. And so part of it is that the other part, and let's address the question of blackness, is that we're taught to hate ourselves, right? And so we're dealing with internalized racial oppression. So if you hate yourself as a black person, and I think that you just went out, but I want to wait for you to come back.
I did. I'm here.
Okay, good. So
I'm here.
if people taught to hate themselves as being black, then when they see another black person, they hate themselves. And the truth of the matter, wrote an article with Dr. Kamara, is that is not homicide, that's suicide,
Mm.
right? Because when we begin to kill ourselves, knowing that we're already in a precarious situation in terms of people trying to destroy us, then that's a problem. But that's internalized racial oppression that we've been conditioned to based on the historical colonization and oppression of our people, right? And so this is why we have to deal with the psychology that speaks to what's happening to us, and not deal with a psychology that speaks to white people and white supremacy staying in power.
Mhm. So what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Vandermeer, is that because we don't love ourselves, we're not valuing life. So how could we value someone else's life?
Exactly. And so part of it in the schools, that's in the curriculum, right? You still got black children, when they see a black and a white doll, still embracing the white doll because they say that the white one is good and the black one is bad. That's fact, right? And so we got to change that. We have to create mass education about self-love, and loving ourselves. And that it is our responsibility to resist anybody who take that position. So, the churches and the churches got to do more than calling the police. The churches should be opening up their doors and helping our communities, and not because they are Muslim or they're Christian or they're Buddhist. Well, I don't care what denomination is. A human being is a human being, right? And that is the philosophy that we have to begin to embrace, in terms of how we see each other to be able to support, communities. But we have a lot of work to do, because part of what we taught is to be selfish versus being selfless, right? In
Mhm.
terms of how we come together as a community. When someone in our community is in pain, we all should be in pain. It only takes one, because if they work on them, they'll work on us next. And we have to have that level of humanity and that level of solidarity and unity.
So, Derrel, would you have anything to add to what Dr. Vandermeer sharing about self-love? I know you talked a lot about that on your lives, about people doing the work
Mhm.
and really working on healing themselves. And I know you've done a lot of work yourself. So what are some of your comments or thoughts on that?
I really just believe in with everything he said, and I feel like a lot of these resources need to be given to us by us. And I know I'm like hell bent on that one, but it's really important that the people who come from the certain society, that the demographic that they're trying to help and fix and get out of those situations, they have to be coming from there and have defeated whatever corruption that they have gotten through morally, and then also just have healthy practices going on in their life. They have to have a track record that ensures that part of the community, whatever they're doing. And I feel like we have a whole bunch of programs that necessarily isn't for us. Like, it isn't progressive for us, like down to anything, even life insurance, like just a lot of things is just, it's like a lot of stuff isn't for. I feel like at the end of the day, we have like Professor Vandermeer said, we have to get a lot more stuff, some better resources. I would say that's the only thing I could add to that, by us.
So some people have the opinion that, especially in Boston, we are very resource rich, right? So there's all these different programs. And again, Derrel, you do, Feed the Hood. There's so many people out here collectively um, that are speaking up and trying to address the issue. So we keep saying resources, but we seem to have a lot of resources. So do you guys have any take on what is that about?
I really just
Well,
one thing
good.
to. I'm not even gonna say much. I'm just gonna say we fed 30,000 people, and we got clothes and essentials, and we did all of that with just donations from the community, by the community, and we just stayed consistent on helping the community. We had no financial donations and all that. So it's like that's a direct aid program. We meet you at your door, meet people, and it literally works because we've seen a lot of people's house change, and we go back and double back every week, and it's been going for a year and a half straight. So programs really need to be by seriously.
Well, it depends on what we mean by resources, and depends on what we mean by we, right? For example, let's deal with the question of housing, right? So the average, cost for housing is like $3,333.
Mhm.
That's not what the people make, right? Boston has become more expensive than San Francisco.
Right.
Okay, right. So you need to make between $75,000 and $85,000 a year to get an apartment. Okay, so let's start with that. So the people that have jobs, are overworked and underpaid, right? Uh, so uh, so the question of healthcare is expense to deal with. So the cost of food, is expensive. There are programs, is correct, but the question is that there are still people who are in need and don't have access to those resources to be able to deal with. Let's deal with the school system. Some of the failing things that's happening in the school system, that they can't properly educate our kids, right? That they don't have the people to, because they're not paying them. Even at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, right? It's a public institution. The way they're treating black people, even our department, we got only one tenure track faculty member that's there, and they'll spend money on everything else except putting money and investing in a program that's dealing with education. In fact, they won't use their resources to make it mandatory for every person to take a course in Black Studies before they graduate. So what I'm saying is that, but they'll use resources for other things that meets their needs. But when it comes to our needs, we're hurting. You go buy mass and cast. Where's the resources for that? You understand? When you got people living in the streets, because of drug addictions and so forth, right? You got folks in 10 City got signs on their doors talking about "I won't be moved" because they want to evict them because remember there was a moratorium around evictions,
Yes.
during
During
COVID.
the pandemic.
So
Yeah.
so I'm saying is that most of the black people there who are subjected to that. So that's that. Where's the resources for that? Why is it housing, education, and healthcare a human right? What is the state doing with its public funds? Where's that money going? Where are those resources going to make sure that our kids are fed, that they're sheltered, and they're being educated, and they have access to healthcare?
So a couple things that you mentioned earlier was around fear. And I think when we talk about resources, we're talking about basic needs. There's a concept called choice theory, and some people might have even heard of Maslow's law, right? That if you can't provide your basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, right, you put people in a state of trauma too, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
they're in fear of survival. And I think often as people of color, we're always in survival mode, and we get vicarious trauma just from just being here, even though I'm not necessarily all of these gun shootings and everything has my anxiety high as a mom every time my son leaves out the house. So everybody is impacted. So I feel like when you're afraid and you're scared, you are not thinking clearly. So I think when you think about and you're talking about different strategies that are more indigenous, I think a lot of it has to do with our coping strategies. But how do you get to a place of calm when you're constantly basically experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder? We never really get to the post part, right? It's constant, ongoing, what I would call chronic adjustment disorders, right? We recover, we get resilient, and then something else happens. We recover, we get resilient, and then something else happens. We don't really get a break. It's just constantly something triggering us. So I mean, as a therapist, I get people, I help them out. They get better, they get back to work and everything else, and then then all of a sudden somebody has a terminal illness, or another person has been killed. And it's like they're right back at square one because they never really get a chance to stay healed.
You know, that's a deep question. I remember when I first started school, I was a psychology major at Northeastern, and I remember talking with uh, Muhammad Ahmed, who was a political assistant to Malcolm X. And I asked him, I said, you know, what is the best form of psychotherapy or therapy? You know what he said?
Mm.
He said revolution.
Mm.
And so when we get out of the construct that the system tried to mold us in terms of what success is, what's making it is, that people are, going beyond their own means and to try to be what the system creates. The more that you change your mindset and you struggle against that, you in fact are healing yourself to create a new sense of being, not only a new person, but a new way of being, a new community. And so, when people aren't ready to commit that type of class suicide to give up what Jay-Z promised you or what Beyonce promised you, what the mass media promise you using black artists like Yeez and all that kind of stuff to sell you sneakers and coats and other kinds of stuff, right? And it's deep because if you take a survey, you ask how many people went to the basketball game, the football game, went to the concert, right? What I'm saying is that why aren't we using culture and music to help soothe us, to inspire us to greatness versus inspiring us to decadency in some ways, right? We got to check the culture, but we have to create a culture this revolutionary nature, not a culture that's counter-revolutionary. This in fact, it's like we shooting ourselves in the head with the kind of cultural imperialism that exists in our communities and throughout this world.
You said a mouthful there because I remember when I was at UMass, one of the things UMass Boston, y'all, I was in deep discovery, self-discovery. So I took a whole bunch of Africana studies class because all they taught was we were slaves. There was really no other narrative. And then another narrative that I got was that we were poor, right? We never had enough money, right? Enough resources. So those two things were the two things I wanted to learn. Wanted to learn about money and I wanted to learn about myself. And, even though I've learned all those things, sometimes I feel like the pursuit of needing money, because we can't do any of these programs unless we fund them ourselves, or now we're applying for grants that are still white dollars. So we have to find a way to build generational wealth or tap into black dollars and keep that money in the black community. We need resources to be able to do that. We want to do our own programs or buy our own building or buy up the block. You need money to do that. So I'm sort of hearing on the one hand, like, throw that away. Let's move away from that. But then what's the alternative if we don't pursue success or pursue, generational wealth? How do we combat capitalism if we don't have any money?
Well, it's not the idea is not to be what the system is. The idea is a transitional program, right? So in other words, Malcolm said that before we get where we got to go, we got to eat, we need a place to stay, right? And so forth. And therefore, we have to work. James Brown told us that if you don't work, you don't eat, right? But the question is that what are we doing with that excess time, right, to be able to change our conditions versus staying in that box that they create for us, right? And so, what are we doing with our resources? Do we make an investment in the things that we know is out of our preview, or do we begin to pull our resources to create something differently, right? So the point is that not because otherwise we're perpetuating our oppression. We're perpetuating the same piece. See, the question, when we talk about generational wealth, right? We have to look at us as resources. We have to look at the legacies of people before us, and the wisdom that they've left for us to be able to deal and work, in a way that's going to protect us, right? Because what the system is really pushing is more individualism and competitiveness, right? versus us working together and supporting one another. That's the whole issue, that we tear one another down because we're taught to tear one another down, versus lifting one another up. But it's not just that one other, because when we lift someone up, they're pulling another one, right? In terms of dealing with that, and we have to change that perspective. But we have to do what we got to do in order to do what we need to do and what that's best for us in terms of deal. But we can't believe the press release. You see, we got people, we got all these athletes that got money, right? In fact, we're doing, we're doing bad, but we've done worse.
I'm glad you said that, because as I was going and looking this up, right, and I'm not going to say that the numbers can always be off, right, because we're still looking at the powers to be as far as who's reporting the numbers. But some of the things that I discovered, which I thought was interesting, is that United States has the highest percent of gun ownership worldwide. So speaking to what you just said about Cuba, there are 120 firearms per 100 people in the United States, with 30% of Americans owning at least one gun, right? So when you think about that, and you think about that's in the world, we tend to just in the United States be a lot more, it seems like, violent, right? It's not necessarily as safe as we may think it is. The other thing that I thought was interesting is that overall, Massachusetts is one of the lowest states. We also are one of the lowest states as far as owning guns. Now, again, the FBI last year had some issues with changing over their whole system. So again, the reports and the numbers may not be, 100% reliable. But what I did find, it just seems like, is this another way of us focusing in on gun violence versus focusing on the things that Dr. Vandermeer and Derrel are talking about, which is we do have a lot of resources. We spend a lot of money on eating out, going on vacations. Like, it's not as if we don't have the ability. Is it just that we have gotten, I go back to, complacent and have accepted that there's going to be some level of violence, right? There's going to be some level of violence. There's going to be people to do things that are harmful to people, and it's just part of our way of living. Have we got complacent with it?
I don't think so. I think that we gotta remember this ain't our democracy, and no disrespect to our elders, because I love our elders and stuff, but it's 2022, and I feel like things are different. You get what I'm saying? Like, in a certain way, it's a lot similar, because our people are weakened. I feel like they're not as strong mentally like the elders were. Like, they knew their blackness a lot more. If a lot of our people knew that this ain't our black culture after all these decades and all we've been through. I don't be way more knowledgeable, but we ain't. And I feel like right now it's just, when we say resources and stuff, it's just like, I feel y'all, like, there's a lot of resources, but I feel like the power has to be people power. And like, when we talk about the black dollar and everything like that in Boston, there isn't really no black dollar. There's no Kanye West in Boston. There's no Oprah Winfrey in Boston, like Chicago, stuff like that in Boston. Like, to me personally, I feel like it's a lot of comfortable, and a lot of people that get on with it, with whatever the society gives you. And I feel like at the end of the day, like, if the power was shifted more to the pain and people who actually do the work and stuff like that, you will see a big difference, because these people ain't living in our disparities. These people who are sitting in Boston, and ain't people who get a job with the city and just go get their end of the week and do what they have to do, because it's hard to live out, but at the end of the day, there's people on the ground that really need help, and they can move and they can shift, and we're mentally not like that. I think we're more accessible to a lot more internet knowledge and all that stuff. So I feel like at the end of the day, it's about the power shift, like who we giving power to in our society. Like, the resources is $100 million, but I just mentioned y'all 30,000 people got fed. We had $0 when we did it. So I just want y'all to see, like, there's Salvation Army and Goodwill in Boston isn't doing that. We just had 355 people get their Corey seal and record expunged. That's more than some of the law system, one day in 5 hours. So it's just like job access, housing, all of that stuff. Like, who you giving the power to? And that's not to speak for myself. That's to speak for a lot of brothers in the that need power. It's sisters too as well.
Well, the question is sustaining that process, because people have to eat every day. And so the other part, the real issue is not about the resources; it's the distribution of resources
Right.
and the equitable distribution of resources, right? So, like the big talk was Kanye got billions of dollars until he opened his mouth and then the forces went and smacked him down and said, well, Kanye don't have this anymore because it's that relationship that he has with the system, all right,
Right.
and how they use him to be able to liberate dollars from us, right? And
Mhm.
so, but where's that money and where's that money going? Where are the resources and where the resources going? So it's how it's being distributed, is the question. And we don't get our fair share. In fact, the people who got their share was through the exploitation of us, right? You
Mhm.
see, and so we have to be very, very, very careful about that. But when we look ourselves in the context of the world, and so you know, uh, in the sense that we have to deal with being impoverished and being poor, right?
Mhm.
And so you take countries in which, I mean, let's look at the condition of Cuba, for example, which I mentioned earlier, right? You know, because of the U.S. embargo, they can't get medicine. The U.S. is responsible for stopping them from getting medicine. So the world has the resources, but look at what they're doing. So what they talk about how we treat, look how they treat folks in the world,
Right.
right? But the point is that, but they're not shooting people in the streets, right?
Mhm.
And what they do have, they share, right? To make sure that everybody got a little bit, even if it's not enough, right? They
Mhm.
have access to that. Here, we got folks who got a whole lot,
Right.
and then folks that ain't got nothing.
But I think that's what's feeding some of the discomfort where people just feel like they don't have anything to lose. The other piece is that it's not just the violence between each other. People are also killing themselves as well. So there's also that, the suicide rate. So I think overall, just people's mental condition of just feeling hopeful is very much compromised, for lack of a better word. It's just, can I see light at the end of the tunnel? Do I see possibilities? And I think sometimes we can't catastrophize these things. And I know that this is an unpopular opinion, but people are going to unfortunately do things that harm one another, right? We're going to have fights, we're going to have accidents. Things like this are going to happen. But if we spend a lot of time like making this uh exasperating it, right? We make people get afraid. And as they get afraid, then more people want guns, right? So during the pandemic, they were like, hey, we don't know what's going on. More people got gun licenses, including myself during that time, because I didn't know what was going on, right? It was sort of like being perpetuated that we needed to protect ourselves. Now, I haven't purchased a firearm, right, or anything like that, but I do have my license. So I'm thinking about, here I am, someone who is not even a big promoter for wanting a gun, going and getting one because I have people in the military and different things like that. I'm a woman. I'm a homeowner, a business owner. I'm a single mom of a black male child. They didn't know if people was going to be doing home invasions. It was just so many things that folks were saying, but it still goes back to resources, right? If I can't eat and you have all the water, all the Lysol, you got everything that I need to keep myself safe, right?
Yes,
You got
right.
your survival of the fittest. People are gonna be more willing to go and try to get it any way they can.
You're gonna put that ski mask on.
and and we don't want to talk about that, right? We want to act like that's not the reality, but
Yeah,
I
but
wonder if that's feeding some of it. But
yeah,
then you
but,
have just conflict, right? People not
right,
being able to deal with conflict.
right. But you also have January 6th, right? You also have the new Confederates that's trying to put us back into a slavery, right? Based on what happened, the folks that lost the Civil War and we're back in Reconstruction, that's what they want to create. And they got guns. And so I'm saying is that I don't blame you for having guns. I got a license too.
Right.
You're right. I'm not no fool, right? But the question is, I'm not shooting my people,
Right.
right? I'm not shooting anybody. But if people come in my house trying to harm me, then they're gonna have a problem.
Right.
right? And so what I'm suggesting is that yes, you create a desperate situation, people are going to act desperately,
Exactly.
right? So what I'm saying is that we have to create a better situation, and particularly in the black community, because it's even more difficult because we're living where people are the most desperate, right? And so who they going to take off, right?
Right.
They're not going to the state house, right? They're not
Yep.
going, to the gentrified areas because if they did, there would be solutions right away.
And that brings up another point, right? So on one hand, the gentrification, all of us are really opposed to it, right? But as we get gentrified, then there's certain things that come about, right? Speed bumps, more lights, and that also creates a lot of resentment and apathy and anger, right? So all of these things coming about is just, I just wonder, and I still am in the same place of, even if I have an issue with you, we have an argument, you don't like what I said, or we agree that we're not, agree to disagree. I think a lot of this also goes back to our conflict resolution skills as people of color, our ability to communicate and being able to not get our way, to get a no, deal with rejection. Because why do I have to shoot you? Because me and you had a falling out, or you did something that I didn't like. Why does it have to result to I got to go get my gun and kill you? And people come back and do this. It's not like they're all in self-defense. A lot of these are just senseless.
But who taught that? Malcolm X asked the question. He says, "Who taught you to hate yourself from the toes of your feet, to the toes of your feet, to top of your head?" Right. What I'm saying is, who's telling us is this is how you solve conflict, right?
Right.
So what I'm saying is that that's part of the culture. We got to change the culture, right? You see, because then this is what that's in the raps, that's in the music. Folks see it and then they internalize it, and so versus is like finding another way to settle dispute is like let me go get a gun. Then the question is how they get the guns.
I mean, one thing I could say is that as somebody who I spoke to a lot of the local rappers who was talking about killing brothers in the songs and etc. etc. And one thing I say is they holding on to stuff that they don't even have part to do with. They just like utilizing that the killing rap to get them sales. You get what I'm saying? And they really don't know no other way to bring that energy, but not knowing that music sells. Being timeless music is way better. You get what I'm saying? And when you had those conversations with them, they realize like we only could get beats from this certain person. We can only get this. Like people, like it's like so much like implementation in this music game and into our society that like it's crazy. Like I don't want to get
But your point is we got a problem with the culture.
yeah
Right.
huge.
And the culture is used, as ways of, of people getting money, right? And I'm saying is that it's supposed to using culture to really deal with creating a better society, right? You see, and so, but that's the society we live in. We have to change the structure. That's the most difficult part. So that means is that a lot of us who have things, right, have to number one use our resources differently and push the city and the state to use their resources differently, right? Those resources make sure that people have health care and housing, right, and the basic things that human beings need. But if they're not doing that, then they're going to take it out on somebody else. They got it. And they don't need to have a license. They'll get a brick, they get a bat, a bottle, or anything to try to jack you when they're desperate. So we have to change that. We have to change the structure. But that's just not. It's just not the government. We got to put the pressure on the government. But the hardest part is that how do we do that in our communities? And that's real hard because you have people who are collaborators who will go and do those things as opposed to supporting us doing what we need to do. So we're fighting each other around the change we need to make.
Mm-hmm. So I was trying to pull up this clip, but I also want to stay present with what you guys are saying. But there was a clip on Instagram, and I guess I'll try to share it later on my Instagram page because I can't get my Instagram page up here. The clip was it was a white man in particular who was talking about that murdering black people was a marketing strategy. So the powers that be in regards to what music gets played, right, and what gets funded is driving it. But what we also as black people have to realize, we're buying it. But the thing that he brought up was that more white people are going to these concerts and buying it than we are, right? And where I see this showing up for a lot of my clients who work in the school departments and even in some of the outskirt schools, you have not just Caucasian students, but students that are Hispanic and of any other ethnicity other than black people reciting these lyrics, right? Which are very much um infused with the N word and just all types of negative connotations. And it's what's popular. You know, a lot of the shows we see, you see the white people on TV singing and singing all the lyrics and everything else. So you're right about the culture, but we're also feeding into it. You know, I was guilty of that when I went to UMass of using the N word until I got educated. And there's even times now when we're by ourselves and it's just us that we use that word, knowing its historical context. That's another one of those moments that we try to change it around. We do that a lot. We're going to take ownership of the word. If we use the word, then the word can't be used against us. But if a white person says that word, most of us get upset. So have we really created what we're saying we created? Were we taking the power away? No, not if you still get mad if they use it. Then we all know that that word is a derogatory word. So why do we continuously use it the way that we do? So I always go back to our mindset as people of color. What exactly, how are we thinking? How are we processing what's going on around us? Because when I talk about healing, right, are we operating from what we talk, and Professor Vandermeer, you probably know this, are we operating from cognitive distortions where we're not really looking at the full picture? Are we reality testing what's really going on? Like, are we delusional ourselves?
Well, we're very damaged, and that's the struggle. And the struggle is continuous, for us to constantly trying to refine ourselves to try to purge the harm that's been done to us while we deal with all the kind of distractions. While we got to find a place to stay, we got to find a place to work. You know, we got to deal with stuff when we got to deal with other stuff. You know, so it's a question of, you know, how do we shift the culture? You know, for example, you know, if you sold me drugs and you got caught, you go to jail, right? But we have to see part of the culture as a drug that they're selling and nobody's prosecuting them, but people are making money from it, right? And so this is the issue. You know, when Kanye West said that, you know, that slavery was a choice, and he started doing other kinds of stupid stuff, right, around black people. Nobody didn't. They didn't stop. You know, severance their contract with him. You understand?
Exactly.
So we you know, that is our awesome responsibility. It's not easy, right? But every day we got to struggle against the enemy within us that's been put in us. This goes back to slavery and colonization. We have to struggle against that, and we have to find solutions that address that, and we have to get everybody involved in that process. But it's not what somebody else is going to do, is what I'm going to do. If I don't use the N word to you, then I'm not going to give you license to use it against me, to me. And when you do it, then we're going to have an issue. So, well, why is that? The same thing with the B word, right? You see, so but that's the internal struggles that we have to do. But we have to create space, right? Like you're doing, what you're doing now is you're creating space for a conversation. We got to broaden that space for conversations in communities. And that when people raise stuff, we got to challenge that, you know, when we
Right.
at Thanksgiving, right? And then our niece or nephew come in there with some nonsense, and we got to do it with love, you know, not like, you know, shout at them and deal with them. We got to come and we got to give them an alternative, and we got to
Right.
give them positive reinforcement versus putting them down, because they're already put down. That's why they're doing what they're doing.
Well, I wanted to bring this because I know we're getting close to close. We might go over a little bit, but this idea that it starts at home. And you know, often what happens is that the parents catch a lot of blame and flack when they too didn't get what they needed And this is not an excuse, because at some point, my mantra about betting on self, you need to take responsibility for yourself. It's not your fault, but at what point do you take responsibility to say, something's not right about this? I'm going to start to work on myself. I'm going to start to be a better person. I'm going to be better for my kids, or just better for me, which ultimately would make you a better partner, a better community member. If everybody just took ownership, took some accountability for the role that they play in this situation, right? Yes, slavery happened. Some of us didn't get proper raising. We didn't get proper support. But at what point do we stop using that and start to change the narrative, change this dysfunctional? I always say the buck stops with me, right? I can't continue to keep operating the same way I've always operated. At some point, somebody got to make a change.
Yeah, but you got to know that you don't know.
Yeah.
That part,
Right.
that's true.
And so, and we can't blame the people, from that. But the point is that, right, we have to prepare the people to take that kind of responsibility, because if you feel worthless, you're going to do worthless.
Yeah.
Right. You understand? Now, there are exceptions. There's always been exceptions and so forth. But we have to do a lot of work. Like we criticize the mothers. They did that to my mother. When my 12-year-old brother died of a heroin overdose, and they blamed my mother, but they didn't. The state didn't support my mother. They didn't help my mother, right, for her to be able to, deal with her life of trauma. And that's with many mothers. That's with many of us. Just like you said, when you came to school, there are things you just didn't know,
I
right?
didn't
And
know it.
and you did what you knew, right? So now, what's the change, right? The change was that you ran into some folks that says, "Yo, La, what's up?"
Yeah.
Right? And not put you down, but show you some love. And so and suppose there was a clean glass on the table, and they put a dirty glass on the table, they put a clean one on the table and says, "Hey, La, let's try this one."
Right. But I think that's the key. I think, I'm sorry, Derrel, go ahead.
No, I just want to say I feel like capitalists got their foot on our necks, and we must really know that. And I feel like until we got better resources, like we spoke on earlier, that's deriving from the actual community. I feel like it's gonna be like a lot of people gonna learn from their ignorance, and some people might not learn at all. But that's the risk we taking in this world.
But I go back to, if the rent prices and the housing prices are so far out of reach, you have it, and I mean, you go into the salaries that people are making are not enough to make ends meet. You go into the Black family where, Black women and Black men are not necessarily partnering up to really address these things together. There's so many layers to this, right? And I feel like a lot of times we try to make this a black and white issue. We have very polarized thinking on how to handle it. Well, you know what? Just get rid of all the guns. You know what? The problem starts at home. You know what? Everybody has a mental health issue. And I think it's a combination, and it's a case by case situation. And we really need to kind of look at it that way and not catastrophize or overgeneralize every single situation and lump it all together, but look at each individual situation of gun violence in the different situations. And we need to give individual treatment plans to each situation, right? Every single one of these situations are not the same, and everybody needs something different. And I think that's, one of the hardest parts is, I know I can't do that alone as a therapist. Like, I can't be the only one out here doing it. And some people don't want to do it.
Right. But what's important is that it's a systemic problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so we have to change the structure. Right. And so the hard part to what you're raising is that how do people change the structure when they don't understand that it's the structure?
Right.
Right.
And where do you start?
That's right. And when they're hungry, well, part of it is that this is what we do. And so we all have to learn how to do our work better. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that because what we do is we professionalize a lot of times what we do versus saying, like, wait a minute, because if someone is out there doing harm, it is also my responsibility, because it's just not them doing it to another person. They could do it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think that, it's just what you have done in terms of creating an organization. You dealt with the deal with healing, and you having a program to talk about this, right? We have to be creative, we have to be innovative, and we have to take in consideration the complexities of this going on. But we can only do what we can do, and we got to try to get more people to do what they could do, right? And that's why we have to be organizers, not just a professional, because it's just beyond us making money, right? It's not just because it's someone else, it is also us. Because what's happening when you talk to your friends about the loss, you feel
Yes.
that impacts you as well. So, but we have to create better conditions and we have to push the state. We know better, then we got to do better.
Right.
We have to call the politicians. We have to challenge them when they come and want to do photo ops and says, look, that's cool, but like, what's the program? This is what we need. But more than that, we got to organize the people to take them to their offices,
Right.
right? And say, if our lives are going to be disrupted, then you're not going to be able to be comfortable.
I agree. I think, I said to myself, I think, Derrel, I had sent you that message when we were on Messenger on Facebook. And I said, what I can do is start with my platform and just start the conversation versus just, hey, I'm going to go business as usual. This is, like I said, a complete pivot from what I normally would have talked about tonight. But I said, you know what? Let's just start having some dialogue, talk about some unpopular opinions. Like, I got all these stats and figures, which are great, but knowing all of that isn't necessarily going to change. And the stats and the figures is just to make people see a problem and care about it enough to want to do something that is beyond just the people who passed away over the last couple of weeks. But this is a systemic, layered issue that's going to take a collective effort. For one, Dr. Vandermeer has called to action to call UMass Boston. One of the things is educating everybody about Black history. If you just had to take one course in Africana studies, it would change your perspective. That's across the board. I know because I'm a product of that. As far as therapy is concerned, right? They have a school of thought that we're not supposed to really share anything about our lives, right? Self-disclosure and all these things. But if I used to do drugs or I was an alcoholic, most programs want me to disclose that. But we need to talk about racism. We need to talk about all of these other isms that are causing people discomfort, that are creating self-hate, right? We need to talk about this stuff and bring it to the forefront because a lot of it is people's thinking. It really is. It's so much connected to how we think, our perception of self. And some of us don't even want to admit that we don't really like ourselves. One of the activities I do in my group, which one last piece, access. So some people have told me, you can raise your prices, right? You can charge more for therapy. And I'm like, well, I don't want to raise my prices so high that people can't access it, right? So it's like that's one of my ways of contributing to it is to still make therapy affordable to people who really need it. If you really want to join one of my courses and you didn't have money, I would let you join it. Tonight we're talking about this and I'm looking at, the numbers. More people should be on here commenting and putting comments in here. And so it makes me wonder, which I go back to, have we gotten complacent? Are we okay with a certain amount of violence? And nobody really wants to be honest about that. But to a certain extent, I think we have. It's sort of like, well, this is what people do. No one wants to be honest about it, but this is what we do, or the blame the victim. Well, I wonder what they did to get themselves killed. There's these other sidebar conversations that we have that I don't think we're bringing to the forefront to talk about on why some of this stuff is happening. And it's easy to say we don't have the resources. It's easy to say we need the leaders to step up. But it goes back to if I pick up a gun and I decide to kill you, there's a certain psyche and mentality that's going on inside of me to make me pull that trigger. And I think that more than anything else, we can talk about everything else that's going on and all of that. I agree. But someone's mentality to say things are so bad, you have threatened me so much that I need to kill you.
But the other part is that when you do good, people will feel it. And like I do restorative, I've done and I still do restorative justice in the prison with cats who've been there for murder, right? I had cats who come out, and I do. It depends on how you want to define therapy, but I'm first of all I'm in the Yoruba tradition, so I deal with counseling people, and I counseled thousands of people. I could guarantee you that, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm saying is that folks come with their issues, right? And the whole idea is like come on and make time for it, because the truth of the matter is that I have a place to stay. I have food to eat,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so what I don't have is a lot of time, but I still make time when people are in situations to have that kind of conversation with them. And
Right.
so that's what you're doing. But see, what I'm saying is that if we just do it, if therapy is just about, sort of a business versus a thing that's going to help build our community, then we got to switch that. And so, and you understand that because that's what you've done. That's what and we need more people to do that. And so, but we want people to bring their whole self, right? Because it's just not about a conversation. It's about them reflecting on that conversation, being able to
Absolutely.
change their behavior, their values, and their beliefs, right, to do the
Talk
right
about it.
thing, right?
Well, I
And
normally
it's like,
ask this question, Professor Dr. Vandermeer, and I didn't do it with you guys, which is what does therapy mean to you? Every show
yeah,
on Conversations with Coach Law,
yeah,
that's the first question I ask every guest is what does therapy mean to you? Which
right,
is all about us shifting the narrative, right?
yeah,
On therapy doesn't have to be that you go sit down with a psychologist or
no,
a psychiatrist or a licensed independent clinical social worker.
yeah,
And I'm trying to express that. Like therapy is different for everybody. So that's what you're
yeah.
sort of touching in on
Yeah,
right
but when I got on and you was playing "Killing Me Softly," Roberta Flack, right? That's an old song for me. That took me to it. That was therapy for me,
now. Hmm.
right? What I'm saying is that how we create the conditions with music, with culture, with art to get people to feel better, and then help them to make those transitions to do better and so forth, right? To get them in
Right.
that space, right? That's what we have to do more. You see, in terms of that. But then what the system do is that they use that rhythm, they use that and try to commodify them and do other kinds of stuff, to
Right.
buy sneakers, or to get them to see women and men in different ways than they are. You know what I'm saying? No, we
Right.
got to use culture in a positive, in a more constructive way that's going to reach people, right? And that's what you do. I like the way your program was structured, the way you was doing the music and so forth, because that's going to reach people, and you got to keep doing it because then you'll reach more people. But sometimes if you reach one, don't mean that, and not reaching everybody else, that one person will be a person that help you reach more people,
I
right?
agree. And I think that I mean, well, you were my professor, so I mean, you would already know I'm gonna have a different lens and a different take. I originally thought all I was gonna do was go make money and come back and buy the block. That was originally my plan. I'm gonna learn about the money. I went into economics and banking and investments. Well, the universe, the Lord, God, however you want to, frame it, said I had a different plan for you. Professor Vanderbilt would tell you I always was outspoken. I always had something to say. And I'm creating a platform through the Urban Heat. This was an opportunity. This is a black owned unorthodox radio station, and we're right here in High Park, right? We don't have the big name sponsors or any of those things. This is a grassroots radio station that we're building from the ground up. So we're now on iHeartRadio, but it's creating a voice and a platform. And I think right now what people need to realize is that we are resource rich. There is more resources and more opportunity than ever before. Social media is a platform. It's how do you use it? You have a daily platform to put out a message. And I know we're going to close, but I want to leave people with this. We need to be the change we want to see in the world, right? There's always going to be unfortunate accidents and people that do things that they're not supposed to do, despite everything that we do right. We have to be able to understand that and counteract that. And I love the grief counseling and all these other ways so that instead of this one bad thing turning into retaliation and 6, 7, 8 more people getting killed because we don't come in with some antibiotics, some remedies, because people are going to do things. But how are we going to respond and not react as a community? I think that's the real major point and why I wanted to have this show tonight. There's people out there hurting, people out there right now that probably want to go retaliate for the things that's going on in Boston. I'm really, if you're listening tonight and you know somebody that's been through something, call them up. Call them up, reach out to them. Dr. Vandermeer just said it. It doesn't have to be a therapist, but you might be the person that calls and says, "Hey, you all right?" And they might have been right about to go and shoot somebody. We just have to love up on each other a little bit more and have a little bit more empathy. And that goes for the families that have lost somebody too. because a lot of them are hurting and they want blood. They want revenge. They're upset. They're angry. How could you take my loved one away? Right. But at the flip side of that, we got people who are also hurting and going through whatever. And a lot of times they're not thinking straight. And it just keeps perpetuating and perpetuating more. Where as a community impacted, both of the families are impacted, kids are impacted. It's just so much of a domino effect if we don't start to heal, right? We'll stay in this angry place of not knowing how to forgive ourselves or anyone else. And I think if we don't fix that, we're going to keep picking up guns.
That's right.
I'm going to keep doing that.
You have a platform.
I love to do a part 2. I usually end at 11 o'clock because it's the Sunday. I know y'all are both tired, but I give you each 30 seconds. Is any last minute encouragement, resources, how people can reach you that you want to share with the audience before we close?
Well, first, thanks for the opportunity for us to share space together. And I want to say, Malcolm X told us a long time ago. He says that things will only get better when we make them better. And so each of us have to try to make things better. And you're correct. For people who are, if you know someone is hurting, call them, check them out. I spend the whole day with my daughter and her mother. We went out to go watch the Women King. We went and had something to eat, and talked about stuff. And that made a difference, And so I would encourage folks to check on each other and be there for each other, because that's how we're going to help people to be more hopeful when they know that someone is there for them.
Agreed. Derrel?
I just want to say love. Just everybody, just love. RP to the sisters. Everybody who's recently impacted to the murders in Boston. And also, we got a Black Women Shifters event coming up with the Corey Hill Records, 1,000 access and other stuff. That way we create our resources for our folks. And I appreciate you, Coach LA, for having me on the event, for giving us this free knowledge that you're giving us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Derrel. I think we definitely need a part 2. Definitely, since the sound, we had like a lot of people in, probably when they didn't hear me. Our attention spans are very short. So as soon as they see no sound, they jump to the next thing. So the great thing is that this will be replayed. You are listening to the Urban Heat 98.1 FM. This is Conversations with Coach La. Come on every Sunday at 10 p.m. For those that listen through Facebook and YouTube, thank you for tuning in. Everybody on iHeartRadio, thank you for tuning in. I know people listen. Not everybody is on Facebook. For those that jumped on Facebook, thank you so much for letting me know about the sound. We appreciate you. And to Mr. Marv Neal, the man with the vision, thank you for all the troubleshooting and engineering. You are appreciated. Derrel and Dr. Vandermeer, thank you again this evening for joining Conversations with Coach La. Sending out a lot of healing. Give a little moment of silence to everybody that's been impacted by any level of violence, gun violence. It doesn't matter what it is, or you've lost a loved one. I know the grieving process is not linear, right? It's cyclical. It's got its ups and its downs and its valleys. Again, if you are in need of support, you can always reach out. I do my best to try to take on clients, even if it's just a consultation and just to talk to you for a brief moment. Schedule permits. I have a full caseload. You can also join the show, comment, share it with someone. Trying all different kinds of ways to just send out positive messages and reach more people. So I thank you both for joining me. I want you both to have a wonderful evening. Let me try to cue up my closing intro. I tell you, this navigating stuff is fun. As I enjoy trying to do multiple things. It's like a whole fort back here. If you could see my fort of all of the things I got moving at once that I'm navigating. But thank you all for joining. I want you all to have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Tony Vandermeer. Thank you, Derrel. Have a good evening, everybody.
Take care.